If you think you know your own family, I dare you to look a little closer. My name is Sophie Marlin. I'm 23, the girl who always does everything right, the one who bakes cookies for her study group and remembers everyone's birthdays, the peacemaker of my impossibly blended family. People say I have a calming energy, warm smile, steady hands, hair tied in the same messy knot every day, as if that could keep chaos at bay. But they don't see the cracks underneath. And, until last Friday, I thought I had everyone figured out, especially Ethan, my stepbrother. You see, Ethan isn't like the rest of us. He's a contradiction. Tall, athletic, always a little too silent, too watchful. When our parents married, he and I were both old enough to resent the whole idea. Old enough to remember the houses and families we lost. Ethan moved into our home with his heavy guitar case and those haunted blue eyes, and from day one we circled each other like wary cats. Sometimes we fought, sometimes we laughed, sometimes I wondered if we'd ever really be brother and sister. But I always thought I could read him, until that morning in the kitchen. It started like every other Friday. I was up before sunrise, pressing the button on our ancient coffee machine and watching it sputter to life. The kitchen was mine in these early hours, my kingdom of peace, before the world woke up and started demanding things from me. I hummed to myself as I poured oats into a pot, glancing at my phone. A single unread message blinked on my lock screen. My best friend asking if I'd convinced Ethan to help with the dinner that night. The answer was no. Ethan had made himself scarce all week, barely speaking to anyone. I figured he was stressed about exams or maybe just tired of pretending. We were a normal family. I sighed and turned on the stove, losing myself in the gentle rhythm of stirring. But then I heard it, a soft creak behind me. I spun around, heart lurching, and there he was. Ethan, already dressed, hair tousled, eyes ringed with the kind of shadows that don't come from sleep alone. I forced a smile. "You're up early." He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the fridge, rummaged for something, then moved to the cupboards. There was a frantic edge to his movements, an impatience that made my skin prickle. "Looking for something?" I tried to sound casual, but my words sounded too bright, like sunlight bouncing off glass. He just shrugged. "Yeah, I can't find the cinnamon." I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you need cinnamon?" Ethan paused, meeting my gaze, for a second too long. His jaw flexed. "Just leave it, Soph. Just leave it." That was Ethan's answer to everything. I almost said something, but his expression stopped me. Instead, I watched as he rifled through drawers, his fingers shaking. Just a little. I wanted to ask if he was okay, but the silence between us felt too thick, too fragile to risk breaking. The kettle whistled. I turned away, poured myself coffee, and tried to ignore the odd sense of tension filling the room. Outside, the sun rose higher, painting golden stripes across the countertop. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then, a crash. I whipped around, coffee sloshing over my hand. Ethan stood frozen, eyes wide, a jar shattered at his feet, glass and something powdery spilling in a messy heap. He didn't move, didn't even swear, just stared at the ground as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. I stepped closer, voice gentle. "It's fine, I'll clean it up." But Ethan shook his head almost violently. "No, don't. I've got it." I hesitated, unsure whether to argue. He crouched down and started scooping up the shards with his bare hands. I winced. "Ethan, you'll cut yourself." I said, "I've got it." His voice came out sharper than I'd ever heard. For a moment, he looked at me, really looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. Fear? Shame? Something darker? The air between us seemed to hum with unsaid words. I wanted to step in, to say something soothing, but something told me to hold back. So I just stood there, heart pounding, while Ethan gathered the broken pieces and threw them in the trash. I watched his hands, steady now, almost too steady, and felt a strange chill run down my spine. He washed his hands in silence, then turned away from me, shoulders tense. "Are you okay?" I tried again, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. He didn't answer. He just grabbed his backpack and left the kitchen without another word, leaving me alone with the mess and 100 questions. I stared at the shards of glass in the trash, feeling the knot of worry in my stomach twist tighter. Ethan had always been distant, but never like this. And what was with the cinnamon? What had he been looking for? Why did he seem so afraid? I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was overreacting. But as I finished making breakfast, my mind kept circling back to Ethan's face, pale, haunted, like he was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. For the rest of the morning, the house felt different. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow seemed to linger. I kept expecting Ethan to walk back in, to explain, to laugh it off. But the kitchen stayed empty, and the silence pressed in on me like a question with no answer. I found myself replaying old memories. The first time Ethan and I cooked together, burning pancakes and laughing until we cried. The arguments over whose turn it was to do the dishes. The night we stayed up talking about our real parents, sharing stories neither of us could tell anyone else. There were good memories and bad ones and everything in between. But through it all, I'd always felt like I could rely on Ethan in some quiet, unspoken way. Now, for the first time, I wasn't sure. Later that day, as the family buzzed around, preparing for the big dinner, I kept searching for Ethan. Every time I caught a glimpse of him, disappearing up the stairs, hunched over his phone in the hallway, he seemed to vanish before I could say anything. Something was happening. Something I couldn't see, couldn't understand. And for the first time, I realized just how little I really knew about the people I called family. That night, as I stood alone in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. And I was right. You can tell yourself 1,000 times not to worry, but worry finds its own way in. The rest of that morning crawled by, thick with the tension that Ethan had left hanging in the air. I couldn't focus on my emails or the textbook I'd planned to read. My thoughts kept circling back to the kitchen, to the broken jar, to Ethan's haunted expression. It was like an itch under my skin. What was he hiding from me? I tried to distract myself by helping my mom with dinner prep. She was in her element, spices scattered across the counter, recipe cards fanned out like a magician's deck, laughter in her voice as she tried to wrangle my younger stepbrother Milo away from taste testing everything, but I barely registered any of it. My eyes flicked constantly to the kitchen doorway, waiting for Ethan to reappear. "Did you ask Ethan to help with the dessert?" Mom asked, handing me a bag of flour. I shook my head. "I don't think he's in the mood." She frowned, concern flickering across her face. "He's been so quiet lately." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A message from my best friend, Hannah. "Did Ethan say yes about the playlist? We need him to DJ, Soph." I sighed. I hadn't even asked him about the music yet. Ethan always ran the playlist for our family dinners, weaving in everyone's favorites like it was a magic trick. But lately, it was like he was deliberately avoiding anything that would make him the center of attention. I typed back, "Not yet." "He's being weird," Hannah replied instantly. "He's always weird, lol, but you love him." I didn't answer. Love was a strange word for what Ethan and I shared. Sometimes I wondered if it was love, or just a kind of fragile trust, built brick by brick over years of living in the same house but never quite belonging in it. By noon, my nerves were shot. Ethan still hadn't shown his face. I found myself pacing the hallway, checking the doors, listening for his footsteps. The memory of his voice, sharp, almost desperate, echoed in my mind. Just leave it, Soph. What was I supposed to leave? Alone? What was he so afraid I'd find? In a fit of anxiety, I ducked into his room. The door was half open, a sign that he hadn't bothered locking me out. I felt guilty snooping, but curiosity won. His guitar was propped in the corner, a stack of music books beside it. On his desk, a single sheet of paper lay folded in half. My heart hammered as I glanced at it. Just a list of song titles, nothing suspicious. I found an empty mug on the nightstand, a sweatshirt tossed on his chair, a familiar scent. Ethan's cologne, sharp and comforting, but nothing out of place. No secret, no clue. Except the box. It was half hidden beneath his bed. Old, battered, the size of a shoebox. I knelt, heart thudding, and slid it out. My hand hovered over the lid. "Don't," something inside me whispered, but I ignored it. I lifted the lid and immediately froze. Inside were scraps of paper, photographs, and a bundle of old recipe cards tied with a faded ribbon. I recognized the handwriting, spidery, looping, nothing like my mother's or Ethan's. It must have been his mother's. I remembered seeing her only once. Years ago, a gentle smile, a scarf wrapped around her hair, a laugh that sounded almost like Ethan's when he let his guard down. I gingerly picked up the recipe cards. The top one read, "Sunday stew for special occasions." I swallowed. I'd heard stories about Ethan's mom's cooking, but he never talked about it, and I'd never seen these cards before. Before I could dig further, footsteps sounded in the hallway. I panicked, shoving the box back under the bed, heart racing. The door creaked and Ethan's shadow filled the doorway. He stared at me, silent. I tried to act casual. "Hey, Mom wanted me to ask if you'll help with dessert." He didn't answer at first. His gaze flicked to the bed, and I thought for a wild second that he knew exactly what I'd just done, but he just nodded stiffly. "Maybe. Later." He stepped aside, waiting for me to leave. I squeezed past, cheeks burning. The knot of tension between us felt even tighter now, like a rope pulled to snapping. Back in the kitchen, I threw myself into making the bread, kneading dough until my arms ached. Every time the timer beeped or a cabinet slammed, I jumped. I kept seeing the box, the recipe cards, the look in Ethan's eyes, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, one push from falling. The afternoon sun slid across the floor, and the house filled with the scent of roasting vegetables, garlic, herbs. Family began to trickle in, my stepdad cracking jokes, Milo setting the table, my aunt arriving with her famous lemon pie. The energy in the house buzzed, but I felt oddly out of sync with it all. As I was shaping roles, I heard Ethan's voice, low and tense, coming from the pantry. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "Don't want anyone to know, okay?" A pause. It has to be a surprise. For her. Who was he talking to? I pressed closer, my heart pounding. But before I could hear more, the pantry door swung open and Ethan almost crashed into me. "Sophie, what the hell?" I forced a laugh. "Just grabbing the flour. Sorry." He glared, but there was something fragile about him, a look I hadn't seen before. "If you need anything, you can tell me, I said softly. For a second, I thought he might actually say something real, but he just shook his head and walked away, shoulders hunched, leaving me with more questions than answers. Evening crept in. The table was set, candles flickered, music hummed from the speakers, Ethan's playlist after all. People joked and chattered, the kitchen overflowing with voices and laughter. I tried to lose myself in the comfort of family, but Ethan's absence at the table gnawed at me. Finally, as everyone gathered for dinner, Ethan reappeared. He looked pale but determined, a lidded casserole dish in his hands. He set it down with more force than necessary. "I, made something," he said quietly. "It's a surprise." Everyone applauded, but I saw the way his hands shook as he removed the lid, revealing a stew that filled the room with a rich, familiar aroma. My mother blinked in surprise. "That smells amazing, Ethan." But Ethan just stared at the table, jaw clenched. I wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him it would be okay. But before I could move, Milo let out a gasp. "Is that cinnamon in stew?" A hush fell over the room. I met Ethan's eyes, and for a moment I saw something like hope flicker there. But underneath it, something deeper, fear and longing, and a secret I still couldn't reach. Whatever Ethan was hiding, knew I was closer than ever to finding out. But the truth, when it finally came, would change everything. And in that moment, as the family dug into his mysterious dish, I realized just how little control I had left. The first spoonful was a revelation and a disaster. At first, all I noticed was the hush. The chatter at the table faded as everyone tasted Ethan's stew. The flavor was bold, somehow nostalgic, warm with cinnamon and cloves, a recipe that felt like it belonged to someone else's childhood. It was the kind of food that asked you to remember something you'd never actually lived. My mother's eyes widened in surprise. My stepdad let out a pleased, and even Milo, a notorious picky eater, looked up with raised eyebrows. But something felt off, like the room was holding its breath, waiting for a verdict. And then, just as quickly as it started, the spell broke. "A bit sweet?" Aunt Lydia remarked, trying to sound diplomatic. "Is there cinnamon in this?" Milo blurted out again, still baffled. My mother glanced at Ethan. "It's lovely, but I've never tasted stew quite like this." Ethan froze, his spoon suspended in midair. I saw a flash of panic in his eyes, and then something else. Hurt. He looked down, jaw tight. "It's an old family recipe," he muttered, barely audible. "From my mom." No one seemed to know what to say. I wanted to reach across the table to defend him, but my own confusion held me back. The cinnamon, the secret, the way he'd shut me out all week, it was like staring at a puzzle with one piece missing. I pushed my bowl away, appetite gone. "It's different, Ethan, but it's interesting." He didn't meet my eyes. After that, dinner descended into awkward small talk. Everyone pretended nothing was wrong, but the tension hovered like a thundercloud. I watched Ethan pick at his food, shrinking deeper into himself with every minute. My chest tightened. I had to fix this. I had to know the truth. After dessert, as people drifted to the living room and laughter cautiously resumed, I slipped into the kitchen. I found Ethan there, scraping the last of the stew into the trash, his shoulders hunched and rigid. "Ethan, wait." I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. He kept his back to me. "Don't, Sophie. Just let it go." "Why? You've been acting like I'm the enemy all week. If you're upset, you can talk to me. I want to help." He laughed bitterly, but it sounded like a sob. "You can't help. Nobody can." The words stung. "Ethan, I know I went into your room. I shouldn't have. I saw the recipe cards. Are they your mom's?" He spun around, eyes blazing. "You had no right." I took a shaky breath, fighting tears. "You're right, I'm sorry. But you're scaring me, Ethan. What's going on?" For a moment, I thought he'd shut down again. But then he ran a trembling hand through his hair, voice breaking. "You wouldn't understand. Nobody ever does. I just wanted to do something right for once. For her. For all of us." A silence hung between us, heavier than before. "For who?" I whispered. "My mom." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Today's her birthday. She used to make that stew every year. I thought, if I could just get it right, maybe things would feel normal again. But I ruined it. I always ruin everything." He turned away, shoulders shaking. I saw the vulnerability in him, raw and unguarded. Suddenly, all the anger in me dissolved, replaced by a painful tenderness. I stepped closer, voice gentle. "Ethan, you didn't ruin anything. You tried to share something important. That matters more than whether people liked the taste." He shook his head. "You don't get it, Soph. I wanted you to like it most of all." The admission hit me hard. I realized in that moment that all the walls Ethan had built were to protect himself from this very feeling, rejection from the only family he had left. I blinked back tears. "I do like it, Ethan. I do. And I'm sorry I made it harder for you." I should have just listened instead of pushing. He sniffed, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "You always push. You never let things go." I managed a shaky laugh. "That's what sisters do, right?" He looked at me, a flicker of a smile appearing through the sadness. "Yeah, I guess." We stood in silence, the tension melting just a little, but I could still sense a heaviness in the air, like we'd started to untangle something too big for one night. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the living room. My heart lurched, But then Milo's voice called out, "Sorry, just a lamp." We both exhaled, tension breaking with laughter. I turned back to Ethan. "You want help cleaning up?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, thanks." We worked side by side, scraping plates, stacking dishes. The simple rhythm of the work felt grounding, like a silent apology. I caught Ethan glancing at me more than once, his eyes softer now. No, I said. "When you first moved in, I thought you hated us. Hated me." He shook his head. "I didn't. I was just scared. Everything was new. And I was angry about losing my mom. You were always so together, like nothing could ever break you." I shrugged. "That's just what I want people to think." A small, genuine smile from Ethan. "Me too." I smiled back, feeling the distance between us shrink, if only for a moment. After the kitchen was spotless, Ethan hesitated in the doorway. "Sophie? Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on me, even when I make it impossible." A lump rose in my throat. "Never." He lingered, as if wanting to say more, but then Milo called for us to join a game in the living room, and the spell was broken. As the evening wound down, I watched Ethan slip away to the backyard, the cold air closing around him. I thought of following, but decided to give him space. Maybe that was what he needed most. I drifted upstairs, my mind replaying everything. The cinnamon, the recipe, the broken jar. The way Ethan's pain had bled through his silence. For years, I'd believed that I could fix anything with enough effort. But some things you can only mend by letting go, by listening, by being there even when you don't have the right words. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I was no closer to solving Ethan than I'd ever been. But I finally understood. Being a sister wasn't about fixing or even always understanding. It was about staying even through the mess. Downstairs, I heard the soft clink of dishes, Ethan probably washing his hands one last time before heading to bed. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of peace that comes after a storm. I closed my eyes, feeling something in me loosen at last. Tomorrow, I promised myself I would try again. But nothing could have prepared me for what Ethan would do in the kitchen the next morning and the way it would change everything between us forever. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I saw Ethan's eyes, haunted, pleading, full of questions I couldn't answer. When I finally got up, it was still dark. The house was wrapped in silence, thick and expectant, as if holding its breath for whatever might come next. Downstairs, the kitchen was cold and empty, the scent of cinnamon from last night clinging to the air. I put on a pot of coffee, waiting for the comfort of routine to settle my nerves. It didn't. All I could think about was the recipe, the way Ethan had looked when everyone criticized his dish, the confession he'd made. "I wanted you to like it most of all." My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. "How did dinner go? Did Ethan survive?" I stared at the screen, not knowing what to say. Ethan hadn't survived, not really. Not the way I'd hoped. The stew, his mother's birthday, the invisible wall he'd put between us. It all felt too heavy, too complicated to explain in a single message. I just typed, "Weird night. He's not okay." I was pouring coffee when I heard footsteps overhead, then the creak of the stairs. Ethan. My stomach tightened. I wanted to apologize again, to ask 100 questions. But when he entered, he didn't look at me. He walked straight to the fridge and began pulling out leftovers with a robotic focus, his movements stiff and careful. "Morning," I ventured, voice uncertain. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. He set a casserole dish on the counter, then turned to rummage through a drawer, one he'd already checked twice. I watched him, feeling the awkwardness thicken between us. Finally, I couldn't stand it. "Are you making something?" He paused, hand hovering over a whisk. "Yeah, thought I'd try the stew again." I hesitated, surprised. After last night's disaster, I expected him to avoid the kitchen for a month. But Ethan looked determined, almost stubborn. "I can help," I offered, stepping forward. He flinched but didn't say no. For a moment, we stood in silence, the air taut with things unsaid. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Could you chop the onions?" he asked, voice quiet. I grabbed the knife, grateful for something to do. We worked in silence, the steady rhythm of our movements filling the space where words had failed. As I diced vegetables, I found myself remembering the first time Ethan and I had cooked together, years ago. We'd ruined pancakes, set off the smoke alarm, laughed until our sides hurt. It felt like a memory from another life. Ethan began browning, meat in the pan, his back tense. "You were right, you know," he said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, startled. "About what?" He kept his eyes on the pan. "I have been shutting you out. I didn't want anyone to see how much this mattered to me." Something in his tone made my chest ache. "Why not?" He shrugged, swallowing hard. "Because if I mess it up, it feels like I'm losing her all over again. And I already lost her once." I put down the knife, fighting the urge to reach for Ei. Him. "Ethan, you're not alone. You have us. You have me." He finally looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sometimes it doesn't feel that way." A painful silence followed. I wanted to say something, anything, but all my words felt small. Instead, I focused on the soup, tossing in the onions, stirring quietly. Minutes passed, tension easing with the slow, familiar dance of cooking. The kitchen filled with the warm, spicy aroma of cinnamon, cloves, and simmering broth. For the first time in days, I felt a fragile peace settling between us. Ethan cleared his throat. "There's something I need to show you." He walked to the pantry and pulled out the battered box from under the bottom shelf, the same one I'd snooped in yesterday. He set it on the counter, sliding it toward me. "I was angry that you went through my things," he said, voice steady, but gentle. "But maybe you should see what's inside." I opened the box slowly. Inside, along with the recipe cards, were faded photographs. A young woman with Ethan's eyes, smiling in a sunlit kitchen, arms dusted with flour. There was a letter, yellowed and creased, addressed in a handwriting I recognized from the recipes. I picked it up, glancing at Ethan for permission. He nodded. I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I hope you're old enough to remember how much I love you. I know you're strong, even when you don't feel it. I'm sorry for every day I won't be there to see you grow. Remember, family is what you choose to build. Let yourself be loved, and don't be afraid to share the things that matter most. Love, Mom." Tears pricked my eyes. I handed the letter back to Ethan, unable to speak. He held it close, as if drawing strength from the words. "I found that a month after she died," he said, his voice raw. "I've been scared to show anyone. Scared it would make her more gone somehow." I shook my head. "She'd want you to share it, to let us in." He nodded, wiping his eyes. For a long moment, we stood together, surrounded by the scents and colors of cooking and memory. Suddenly, the oven timer beeped, jarring us both from the moment. I hurried to pull out a tray of fresh bread, laughing as I nearly dropped it. Ethan grinned, an honest, open smile I hadn't seen in months. We set the table together, moving in easy rhythm. As we worked, we talked. Really talked. About the first awkward year we'd lived together, about his mother's Sunday stews, about the ways we'd both tried to fit into a family that sometimes felt too stitched together to hold. "I used to think you hated me," I admitted, voice soft. Ethan shook his head. "Never. I just didn't know how to start over. But you always tried." I shrugged. "It's what sisters do, right?" He smiled. "Yeah, I guess it is." As the stew finished simmering, I tasted a spoonful, savoring the bold, comforting flavors. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Ethan watched my face anxiously. "It's good," I said, smiling. "It tastes like home." His relief was palpable. We carried the meal to the table, the kitchen now filled with sunlight, laughter, and the faint trace of old ghosts fading away. Just as we were about to sit, my mother entered, pausing in the doorway. She took in the scene, the two of us, side by side, the stew on the table, the remnants of a sleepless night still in our eyes. "Looks like you two figured things out," she said, her voice gentle. I looked at Ethan, then back at Mom. "We're working on it." For the first time, I believed it. But deep inside, I couldn't help but wonder. Was this peace here to stay? Or just another calm before the next storm? Because with Ethan, the story was never really over. And I knew the biggest surprise was still to come. I'd spent so long waiting for things to fall apart that I never expected them to fall together. The kitchen was brighter than usual that morning, sunlight spilling across the table, dust motes swirling like tiny secrets in the air. For the first time in weeks, I woke up without that familiar ache in my chest. Something had shifted between Ethan and me, like a hidden door finally unlocked. Still, a nervous flutter trailed me downstairs, because peace in our house always felt temporary, like an early thaw that could freeze again at any moment. I padded to the kitchen, expecting the same quiet solitude as every morning, but I stopped. Short in the doorway, Ethan was already there, not just there, transformed. He stood at the stove in my favorite hoodie, whistling under his breath, sleeves pushed up, hair falling into his eyes. Flour dusted his hands, and something warm and sweet scented the air. The whole scene was so startlingly normal, so safe, that I almost didn't recognize it. He glanced over his shoulder when he saw me. "Morning, Soph." I blinked. "You're up early." Ethan grinned, a real one this time, open and unguarded. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd try that recipe one more time. Figured you might want breakfast." There was something so casual in his voice, but I could see the nerves underneath. The way he tapped his foot. The way his eyes flicked from the stovetop to the counter, as if afraid it would all go wrong again. He reached into the oven, pulling out a tray of golden, cinnamon-dusted rolls. They weren't perfect, some a little lopsided, a few burnt on the edges, but they smelled like comfort, like new beginnings. He set them on the counter, then handed me a plate. "Want to try?" he asked, his voice softer now. I took a bite, warmth spreading through me, not just from the food, but from the moment itself. The rolls were sweet and spicy, exactly the kind of flavor Ethan's mom had loved. For a second, I could almost hear her laughter, see her hands guiding his. I swallowed, tears stinging my eyes. "They're perfect," I whispered. Ethan looked down, a flush creeping up his neck. I wanted to say thank you for everything, for putting up with me, for not letting me shut you out." The vulnerability in his voice made my throat tighten. "You're my brother," I said, the word simple and true, "even when you're impossible." He laughed, a sound that lit up the room. "Guess we're both impossible then." We ate in comfortable silence, the past few days lingering between us but no longer sharp and raw. When we finished, Ethan surprised me by pulling a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and sliding it across the table. "What's this?" I asked, brow furrowed. He didn't answer right away. I unfolded it to find a letter, in the same looping, familiar handwriting as the recipe cards. To Sophie. My hands shook. I glanced at Ethan, but he was looking anywhere but at me. I began to read. "Sophie, if you're reading this, it means Ethan finally shared our recipes. I hope you know how grateful I am that you welcomed him into your heart, even when it was hard. Families aren't born, they're built, with patience, with forgiveness, with 100 small acts of courage. Take care of each other, and make sure Ethan never forgets how to make my cinnamon rolls. Love, Emily." The words hit me like sunlight after a storm. I looked at Ethan, tears spilling freely now. "She wrote this for me?" He nodded. "She wrote it when she knew she was sick. She wanted me to wait, to give it to you when I was ready. I guess I wasn't ready until now." I reached for his hand, squeezing it. "Thank you for trusting me." He met my eyes, and for once, all the old wariness was gone. "I think I'm finally ready to let you in." For a while, we just sat there holding on. The kitchen felt different. Now, a place of secrets shared, wounds healed, love spoken out loud. But the morning wasn't over. I stood to start cleaning up, but Ethan stopped me. Wait, there's one more thing. He ducked into the pantry, rummaging for a moment before returning with the battered shoebox, the same one I'd seen before. He set it on the counter and pushed it toward me. I opened it and gasped. Inside, along with the recipe cards and letters, was a small velvet box. I looked at Ethan, heart hammering. What is this? He smiled, nervous. Open it. I did. Inside was a silver charm bracelet, delicate and beautiful. Each charm was unique, a tiny book, a guitar, a coffee cup, a little house. I recognized them all, each one a piece of my life, of our life together. She left it for you, Ethan said quietly. She said you'd always be part of our family, no matter what. I couldn't give it to you before, but I want you to have it now. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, feeling the weight of it, of everything we'd been through. Thank you, I whispered, for trusting me, for letting me be your sister. Ethan grinned. You always were. I just needed time to see it. Just then, the back door banged open and Milo charged in, his hair wild and his face full of sleepy confusion. Whoa, what smells so good? He spotted the tray of cinnamon rolls and dove for them. Ethan and I burst out laughing, the tension of the past few days finally melting away. As we sat together sharing breakfast, I realized the truth. Sometimes, the biggest shocks aren't the disasters. They're the moments when something broken is mended, when someone you thought you'd lost lets you in again. I glanced at Ethan. He caught my eye, a glimmer of mischief returning to his smile. Guess I did it in the kitchen after all, huh? He said. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from relief and joy all at once. Yeah, you really did. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. To second chances. To family, I answered. The morning sun spilled across the kitchen, catching on the silver at my wrist. The old wounds weren't gone, but they'd been transformed, woven into the story of us. A story still unfolding, one meal, one memory, one honest conversation at a time. As I watched Ethan and Milo bicker over the last cinnamon roll, I realized I was no longer waiting for the next disaster. I was ready for whatever came next. Because whatever happened, we'd face it together. In this kitchen, in this home, as family, and that, more than anything, shocked me. In the best way. End.